1963 in New Jersey. Our first exhibit coming up on the left is an electric mine train used in the Bonne Terre mines in Bonne Terre, Missouri. This train was used to bring lead ore up from the mines. Our next exhibit on the right is an F-18 Super Hornet fighter jet. This was one of the first jets to roll off the assembly line here in St. Louis at McDonnell Douglas, who is now Boeing Aircraft. Next exhibit coming up on the right is the Aero Train. The Aero Train was a product of General Motors Corporation, built in 1955. 3 of these trains were built, 10 cars long. They ran as commuter trains between Chicago and Peoria, Illinois. These trains ran to 1965 till they were pulled off service. We have number 3, train 2 is in Wisconsin. The original was dismantled for parts. That bus you see was a bus used down in Houston, Texas, taking all field workers to and from their work site. And that caboose is one of the last cabooses to ever operate behind a railroad freight train. Coming up on your left is a white bus. This is a very popular style of bus that was built by General Motors Corporation. 44,000 of these type buses were built between 1959 and 1977. They ran in many major U.S. and Canadian cities. They were affectionately known as the fishbowl bus because of their front window. Here in St. Louis, in the Lindenwood Yards for the Frisco Railroad. The bridge is 100 feet long, weighs out at about 150 tons. And if you do the math, the bridge is 102 years old as of this year. I heard that, sir, and I don't think so. We're getting ready to cross this bridge, and oh, look out, I was told there's an alligator on the loose on the right side of the train. Somebody find that alligator and the baby alligator before it gets loose. Where's the alligator? Where's the alligator? Anybody see it? Good, I'm glad you guys found it. All right. Vicious little thing, isn't it? That jet fighter you see on the pedestal is one of the first straight-wing jet fighters ever built by the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation in 1945. And we have a movie star on the grounds here. If you look as we go through this crossing, that tanker truck, it was one of the trucks featured in the major motion picture Convoy. Of course, that movie was made before most of you all were born, but it was still a major motion picture. Anybody know the theme song? Sing it out now. Okay, I don't hear anything, so I guess nobody knows it. Folks, if you haven't done so yet, I encourage you to visit the upper level of the museum grounds. Start off at the Lindbergh Building, which is our automotive building. We have some beautifully restored one-of-a-kind automobiles, trucks, and horse-drawn carriages and carts from different time periods in American transportation history. When you leave that building, go over to the Barrett Station building. There we have housed railroad memorabilia, railroad artifacts, photographs, books, and we also sell snacks, drinks, and gifts there. Plus we have bathrooms for your comfort. 40s and 50s on the rails, all done by our volunteers, all restored by our volunteers here at the museum. Parked in front of that is the Big Boy, the largest Northline building is home of the visitor center, snack bar, gift shop, and creation station. You have a youngster on board and would love to have a birthday party here, talk to them at the front desk. They'll be glad to help you. And that Wabash Caboose Park next to it, built in 1952. Wabash was the only railroad company to build their own cabooses. And when you get off the train, if you can, take a walk through there. See what it was like to be a railroad crew member on the Wabash freight train. As we roll along this bend here, beautiful day, I ask that you please remain seated as the train pulls into the station, comes to a complete stop. You will hear one toot from your engineer's whistle. At that point, you may disembark the train onto the platform and exit to the rear. Thank you, folks. Have a great day, a wonderful day, a safe day here at the National Museum of Transportation. And please remember, wait for that toot. Thank you.
to go out. So then we'll go.
Another bell.